Welcome to our Sociology webinar with Dr Sarah Cant. I'm Kathy Martin, the Commissioning Editor for Sociology, and today it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr Sarah Cant. Sarah is Principal Lecturer in Sociology and the Director of Academic Studies at Canterbury Christ Church University. We're thrilled to be publishing Sarah's new book, How to be a Sociologist, which she has co-authored with her colleague, Dr Jennifer Hardies. Sarah's going to be talking today about the thinking behind the book, which aims to show students what being a sociologist involves, what sociology can do, and where the subject can take you. So Sarah's presentation will take about 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for a Q&A session to take us to 5 p.m. at the end. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat at any point, and Sarah will answer them at the end. Just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded, and you'll be sent a link to the recording after the webinar. Also, everybody who's here today will be entered into a prize draw to win a copy of the book. I'm now going to hand over to Sarah, and I hope you all enjoy what promises to be a wonderful session.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. And Kathy said that we would be here until 5 o'clock. Maybe we might try and finish 2 minutes to 5, bearing in mind there's quite an important football game going on, and there might be quite a lot of cheering and shouting going from behind me downstairs at any rate. But first of all, thank you for inviting me to do this webinar. I'm really delighted to be here today to talk about the importance and rigour of sociology and the value of studying sociology in schools and colleges. But let me first thank Kathy and her team at Collins for enabling Jen and I to realise an ambition that we'd had for quite a long time, to produce a book that seeks to defend, celebrate and advance the study of sociology in schools and colleges, and support what are already passionate and fantastic teachers that are committed and are already doing a fantastic job. So this book is here hopefully to support you in the magnificent work that you're already doing. So I'm just really passionate about sociology. I just worked out just a moment ago that I've been studying sociology for I think 41 years. And I'm just really always have been passionate about the intellectual and educational affordances of sociology. And I believe there's never been a more important time actually to study this discipline. And yet we know that sociology is sometimes not always accorded the status that I think it deserves. It sort of suffers a bit of an image problem. And so I want to start this webinar discussing that contradiction, if you like, that sociology is simultaneously incredibly valuable, but not always recognised as such. It's often critiqued. I then want to explore what it takes to become a sociologist by outlining what we in the book identify as 6 key dispositions to becoming sociological that mean that our discipline stands out entirely from common sense, of course, and from journalism and from literature, but also from the plethora of other social sciences that are available to students to study. But more than this, I'm going to be arguing that by studying sociology, that you acquire these dispositions yourself. And in turn, these dispositions can be applied to all walks of life. And so sociology in this regard is personally transformative. It helps you in your future career. It helps you in your future life, actually. So in other words, I'm going to be arguing that sociology is a life-changing subject. And it's this promise of sociology that the book seeks to articulate. So Sarah, could you just put the next slide on for me, please? Because I want to start with my first observation, that namely, it's never been more important to study sociology. And I'm not alone in thinking this. You may know Richard Osman, there he is in the picture. One of the hosts of Pointless. He's a TV celebrity, he's a novelist, he's a comedian. He's renowned actually for his rapier intelligence, and he's also the winner of the award of the most unlikely heartthrob. But I don't want to talk about that. What I do want to talk about is something that he wrote very recently in a Twitter post when he said, "Sociology should be taught everywhere. That's my view. Even GCSE sociology arms you against a lifetime of spin, fake news and moral panics." So if that's the GCSE, imagine what the A-level equips a student with. And what he's encapsulating here, for me anyway, is the essence of sociology. Its capacity to enable students to think differently, to think critically, and to think carefully and analytically. And I don't think this has ever been any more important or any more essential. You know, we're just coming out of the most unprecedented times as this pandemic is hopefully now becoming under slight control. And the importance of sociology and sociological thinking is acutely apparent. We've experienced how contagion and recovery is far from a leveller. Some groups are more vulnerable for contracting the virus in the first place. Some have access to ventilators, others don't. Some recover better. Some experience the very, very far-reaching and significant social and economic consequences of the pandemic, whether that be job precarity or, you know, living in overcrowded conditions and not being able to work and so on and so forth. We know what the issues are. Many people have experienced significant loneliness, mental health problems, and of course, bereavement. Some of us in the UK, we've been very fortunate. We can access vaccines very quickly and we've been seeing a fantastic rollout. In other places, that's not the same story. And sociology is imperative, it's central to understanding these enduring and actually, I would argue, deepening social inequalities that characterise all societies across the globe, but are also characteristic of our own society. And yet, despite all these enduring social problems that sociology teaches us about, we also live in a world where there is compassion and where there's empathy and where there's hope, where there's conviviality and where there's optimism. You know, as sociologists, we believe that we can build better futures. And sociology is central for documenting not just the social problems that we experience, but for celebrating social successes and supporting positive change. And therefore, I like to think of sociology as what Michael Young calls powerful knowledge. It's integral to the development of social consciousness and social intelligence. And so the sociology curriculum taught in schools is of central importance for understanding these incredible social difficulties that we have, that we face, particularly, of course, the widening social and economic inequalities, but for also encouraging empathy and a tolerance of difference and diversity. And I think sociology has a major part to play in forming the next generation about economic distribution and about social equality, about race and gender relations, and about quality of life. Because sociology is careful, it's considered and creative. It's not just academic, it's transformative. Okay, but can we have the next slide, please, Sarah? And yet we know from surveys, and I've done a number of surveys now with teachers, that while sociology is extraordinarily popular in schools, I don't know if you've seen the latest figures, but in the UK now, the A-level is the 6th most popular A-level, and that's for both genders. And if we just look at girls, it's the 5th most popular A-level. And intake is increasing. So we had almost 40,000 entrants in this last year. And despite this popularity, it seems to have a peripheral standing, at least amongst senior management and also in the general wider society. So I've argued in a previous article that sociology is both popular but peripheral. And in an article I'm just writing up now, where I've just, you know, as a result of this survey that I just did, and many of you here may have contributed to that, and if you did, thank you, that while knowledge is powerful, sociological knowledge is powerful, sometimes it can be disempowering because some of the content is a bit outdated, and sometimes I would argue a little bit redundant. Some of the stuff that we're studying in the A-level needs to be brought right up to date. Therefore, I believe that sociology, particularly in schools and colleges, has two mountains to climb, both of which sit behind my desire and mine and Jen's desire to write this book. The first mountain is what I'm calling the image mountain. I think sociology is often regarded as soft and easy because it studies the very things that non-sociologists study and experience and they talk about. And because sociologists don't have any special instruments, they cannot easily establish their special insight and expertise. But we know, of course we know this, but what I'm trying to sort of put into the book so that we can really promote this amongst our students is that sociology is far from easy. To be a sociologist demands engagement with complex concepts and theories. It demands the mastery of a range of research methods and actually statistical competency, and also the knowledge to know which method to use where and when. It demands the development of a really critical and analytical capacity to interrogate not just the social world, but the very evidence and methods that sociologists use. And to be a good sociologist, you always need to be mindful of the limitations of our work and assess what questions still remain unanswered. And for these reasons, sociology is not easy. It is a lucid social science, bounded by rules and ethics, that aims to produce objective and careful inquiry. And in the book, we really want to showcase that. The second mountain is the content mountain. Teachers have told me that the current curriculum is content heavy, almost encyclopedic. We just keep adding more and more and more that has to be taught. And this can mean that students often have to end up rote learning rather than engaging with and developing the critical and analytical capacity that sociology affords, the very things that Richard Osman references to in his Twitter post, and the very things that I would argue that are what makes sociology powerful. And more than this, teachers complain that much of the content is a bit outdated, with students saying, is this another dead sociologist? And as a result, some of the content is a little bit outdated. Now, of course, we need the canon. We need to talk about classic sociology, but we also need sociology. And students are going to be enthused about what sociologists are studying here and now, and this current knowledge that's being generated within universities. And so this was another rationale behind the book. I wanted to write a text that defended and celebrated sociology, but also advanced some of the knowledge by including much more up-to-date studies. And we organised the book by 6 dispositions that we think characterise sociology and characterise the study of sociology and make the study of sociology so very important. But there are also 6 very good reasons to promote the discipline within schools, because these disciplines, as I said before, stay with you once you become a sociologist. So I'm going to go through each of those dispositions now, if you'll bear with me. But Sarah, could you click the next slide, please? Okay, you might need to click again because I think there's a transition in it. Thank you. Okay, so the first disposition that we outline in the book is the sociological imagination, the requirement, the need to be imaginative. Because that's what sociology is. It's very distinctive, it's very useful, it explores the relationship between society and individuals, between selves and communities, and between biography and history. And it's seeing that connection between self and society is what makes sociology stand out. But to do that, to see that connection, we need, as C. Wright Mills taught us right away long time ago in 1959, we need a sociological imagination. And by this, he argued that at the heart of the sociological project is both the endeavour and the ability to reveal those connections between what he called personal troubles of milieu, our private orbits, and the public issues of social structure. Now, when he was talking about personal troubles, he meant any experience that we have in our own lives, you know, whether it's divorce, unemployment, racism, poverty. But he meant much more than that when he talked about personal troubles. He meant our values, our aspirations, parenthood, schooling, love, everything that happens to us by dint of being a human being, the everything and anything that humans experience. And so in the book, we twist Mills a little bit and prefer to talk about personal troubles, truths and triumphs, the personal T's. And the job of the sociologist is to make a connection between these personal T's and these public issues of social structure, the economy, the way the society is organised, our cultural values, our history, our politics. That is what is at essence the job of sociology. And Mills describes it in this way. He says, neither the life of the individual or the history of a society can be understood without understanding both. And so the sociological imagination is a quality of mind that allows us to see what's going on in the world, to ask different questions, and to see those connections that might initially appear invisible, to find patterns and ask why they exist, and to use this capacity to understand society. The aim and the promise then of sociological imagination is to make these considered and creative and critical connections. And getting a sociological imagination is really often liberating. You see the world anew, but it can also be rather unsettling because it can kind of pull the carpet from under your feet. The things you've taken for granted can certainly be unsettled. And I remember this as I was studying sociology. I'm sure you see this with your students, that they start to question things that they've never questioned before. And in the book, we use an example of Charles, who's a 19-year-old young man of white ethnicity who has worked very hard. He's done lots of stuff outside school. He's undertaken an unpaid internship. He's excelled at sport. He's really built up his CV, and he's got into university. He's been very eloquent in a university interview and has secured his place. And he believes he's secured his place because of his hard work and his talent. But in his first class, he meets a professor who introduces him to the idea of meritocracy. And he asks Charles and his fellow students to think about where they and how they got to this university and what might have helped them on the way. And Charles, when reflecting on this, comes to see that his successes are not simply individual triumphs, although of course they're part of that. But he has to understand that his success sits alongside the structural opportunities that were afforded to him. He was able to undertake an unpaid internship because his parents were middle class. His white ethnic background and his gender have afforded him the ability to move through an educational establishment without prejudice. And he begins to realise that actually his personal triumphs are underscored by a whole series of public issues of social structure. And this is, as Mills teaches us, magnificent to have that revelation, but sometimes also terrible because you have to rethink. So the first chapter then is called Being Imaginative. We've written it to enthuse this next generation about the capacity of sociology. Okay, the next slide, please. So and you might need to click again, Sarah, because again, there's some animations in here. So in the second chapter, we look at the need to be conceptual as a sociologist, because all academic disciplines have concepts and theories. In science, we have cell theory, Darwin's theory of evolution, Big Bang theory, you name this. And each theory guides the scientist about what they should study, how they should study it, and the methods they should use, and the kind of questions that they should extract, the knowledge that they extract from that. And sociology is no different from that. It too draws on theories to explain the social world. You know, Comte describes sociology as social physics. And our theories become, I like to describe it in this way, the vocabulary and grammar of the sociological imagination. Because once we're conceptual, we can develop explanations of our social world that cannot necessarily be seen, fully proven, or completely known. So sociological theory allows us to conceptualize, explain, and predict. Can I have the next slide, please? But because the social world is so complex, sociology needs multiple theoretical positions, or as we describe it in the book, multiple pairs of glasses. And this is why we've got lots of pairs of glasses on the front cover. And I always find it helpful to explain why we need different theories by drawing on the Sufi parable of the elephant, which is a story about a group of blindfolded men who've never come across an elephant before and can only learn and make sense of what they have in front of them by touching it. And of course, each blindfolded man touches the elephant in a different place and reveals something different. So one of them holds a trunk and says, oh, it's a big snake, for example. You don't need me, you can see the slide. We've got this captured rather beautifully in the cartoon. But I think there's a couple of important things to draw from this parable. The first is that no one of these blindfolded men could understand the whole of the elephant on his own. Each one had his own particular insight, but each insight was partial. And this shows us that we need different perspectives to make sense of something as big as an elephant or something as complex as society. That's why we have multiple theories. But the second point is that these theories that we have, these ideas and concepts, are always, and they always should be, contested and compared with one another. Because just as well as each theory is illuminating, they also have blinkers and limitations. So theories give us a way to see and imagine the world, but they also blinker us to other viewpoints. And therefore in the book, we're trying to explain why we have so many theories, but also that to be an excellent sociologist, you have to be versed in many different theories and you have to learn the vocabulary of sociology. But we also have to recognise that each of these theories are themselves a product of the time and place that they were developed. And this helps us explain why the so-called founding fathers of sociology didn't talk about race and they didn't talk about gender. And so we develop our theories as we start to realise that certain parts of the world are being blinkered and certain issues are not visible to us. So feminism, of course, has permitted us to reclaim founding mothers of sociology and to ask a different set of questions. And in turn, we're recognising, of course, that sociology grew out of and was constitutive of colonialism, which meant that certain truths and certain scholars were accepted while others were silenced. And this observation demands that sociology really takes seriously the decolonising agenda. So the job of the sociologist and the theorist is never complete. It requires us to constantly reflect and think about the value of our theories, albeit that they give us an opportunity and ways of seeing the world that we wouldn't have been able to see it. And so what we do in the book, and I hope this is useful, can you just do the next slide, please, Sarah, is that we go through a number of different theoretical positions. And I see this chapter being a really dip in, dip out for students that they can keep revisiting. So obviously we go through the classic founding fathers, Marx, Durkheim and Weber, and the way that their work has developed. But we also look at feminism and the way that has developed. And we also draw on the very important work of W.E.B. Du Bois and critical race theory. And then we also look at more recent theories about postmodernism and late modernity and so on and so forth. So it's obviously a short chapter that tries to really showcase the importance of theory and also provide students with an opportunity to keep going back and forth, because learning theory for me is a bit like learning a language. You know, it takes practice and sometimes you just have to keep trying and keep going back. We've done lots of things in the book to try and help students latch on to different concepts and to be able to see the different perspectives and the different insights that each perspective gives. Okay, can I get the next slide, please? Oh, Kathy, by the way, because I had to move. We had a bit of a problem before we started. My internet went, and so I had to move into my daughter's bedroom. And I don't have a clock or my watch on, so I've got absolutely no idea of time. So if someone could just give me an indication of where I am on time, that would be extraordinarily helpful.
Yeah, it's coming up to 4:30.
4:30. Okay, I need to wriggle on then. Okay, so the third chapter, we turn to the disposition of rigour, looking at research methods, the sociologist toolkit, and we identify a whole series of different methods. And we try to illustrate these through one example, sex work, and looking at how each method reveals something different and interesting about this type of employment. And we do this because what teachers tell me and what students tell me is that they find learning research methods really boring, and that teachers often find teaching them really dull. And I really want students to be excited about research methods because they provide us with the evidence base of our discipline. I find them extraordinarily exciting. And so we have this whole chapter looking at rigour, showing how methods are central to the sociological toolkit, and they provide us with an evidence base, separating us out from non-sociologists and showing the value and importance of our discipline. Okay. And what we do also in this chapter is show that your theoretical glasses that you put on also start to direct you towards different methods and to explain why different sociologists might prefer certain methods over others. Okay, thank you. Sarah, can I have the next slide, please? Great. Okay, so chapter 4 is what we call Be Knowledgeable. And in this chapter, we cover some key parts of the specification, but really with the ambition to show that sociology and sociology's knowledge is very, very important. It's not homespun. You can't make it up. You can't dream it up in the bath. It's not opinion. It's not something you can generate in the pub when you're chatting with your mates. It's careful, considered and creative. And one of the reasons it's careful and considered and creative is because, of course, it's drawing on this lovely theory and these lovely methods. And so together, theory and methods give us our knowledge and generate information and really important understanding of some really important parts of sociological thought. And of course, sociology studies absolutely anything and everything that people do. That's why it's so endlessly fascinating. This is why after 40 years, I can still open a journal and get excited about sociology. Because sociologists study, macro big issues and social problems, as we've been discussing. They look at people in terms of their socio-demographic characteristics and how these impact on our life chances. And they chart the very real and differing income and educational and health differences that are features of our society. But alongside those very big questions that sociologists ask, they also look at the micro area too. They investigate our interpersonal and everyday lives, our connections with one another, our beliefs, our cultural values, our norms, that sort of micro close-up stuff that makes human life meaningful. Who do we make friends with? How do we get a sense of who we are? Who do we decide to marry, or indeed whether to marry at all? And so sociologists look at everything, don't they? From the whole period of social life, from birth to marriage to death. We even have a sociology of sleep, which my students always find really fascinating, and is a really nice example of just how sociology is can give us insights into every aspect of human life. So in the book, we identify a number of key areas of sociological inquiry, and of course we can't cover everything, but we particularly look at the last three things on this slide, which are why are societies divided and stratified? What do we know about the different types and extent of social division? And we look specifically at the question of social class and gender and ethnicity, and explore how these divisions have real impacts through education and health. We look at also the question of social order. I find it fascinating that we spend so much time talking about deviance, and students really get excited about deviance and crime. It seems to me far more fascinating that most of the time society is extraordinarily orderly and we don't have chaos and things don't fall apart. And so in the book, we look at this question about how and why is social order maintained, what keeps us going in a sort of reasonably steady state. And then we also then look at what happens and why do people break the rules and why do people commit crimes. So there's a section on that, which hopefully, it's covered by most of the specifications. And then the third part of this chapter, so it's quite a big chapter, we look at the question of culture and identity. So we're trying to pull out the key themes that students look at in the A-level specification. And we turn our attention to the ways that culture and beliefs and social norms shape our sense of who we are and our sense of identity and mould our choices. And we use case studies of the family and religion to look at that. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? I've only got a couple more slides. Am I doing all right for time, Kathy? Chapter 5 is called Be Reflexive. And this chapter is designed to really stretch students and to try and get them to think quite differently and to really think about what makes a good sociologist. Okay, thank you, Kathy. Reflexivity is a capacity of all human beings, isn't it? We are inherently reflexive. Anthony Giddens pulls this out in some of his book, and he argues, of course, now that we live in a reflexive society, that this capacity to be reflexive is becoming ever more important. But we constantly think about how we are behaving and what impression that we're having on other people, and how people respond to us changes our sense of who we are. Social life is a performance in that regard. But reflexivity is central, we argue in the book, to the whole sociological project. It requires us to constantly think about our own positionality and how that is impacting on the social world that we are studying. It checks us for any bias that we might have. And it requires us to make sure that we are being ethical when we undertake our research. So these are some of the issues that we discuss in this chapter. And in particular, we raise the issue that sociology and sociological writing often presents modernity, the modern era, as a characteristic of white and global northern societies. neglecting, for instance, the impact of the Haitian Revolution on our changing ideas and aspirations. This is something that Gominda Bambra talks about very extensively and very powerfully. Sociology, she argues, and we argue in the book, needs to ensure that it recognises that slavery is part of our present, our colonial past continues to shape our present, and it was implicated absolutely in modernity and in the advancement of the global north. And so to be reflexive means that we must challenge the colonial and Eurocentric assumptions that characterise much of sociology that we learn. It requires us, I think, to interrogate the sociological curriculum and ask why so many Black scholars are not given their greater prominence and rightful place in the sociological canon, and why global Southern scholars are equally often silenced. So we talk about that in the book and really try and draw out the importance of constantly checking our own bias, our own positionality, not just as human beings, but as sociologists, to recognise that sociology itself is the product of its temporal and contextual positioning. And when we do that, I think it allows us to develop new lines of inquiry. And in the chapter, we identify a number of new cutting edges that are happening in sociology at the minute. For example, the way that we can bring biology and sociology together, the way that we should think about our relationship with animals more extensively, thinking about the current climate crisis, thinking about migration and asylum seeking. So some of the really pressing social issues, and how, if we're reflexive, we can use our sociological imagination to identify new areas of social inquiry. So reflexivity, I believe, is really central to becoming a sociologist, and of course this happens in school already, but we really try to draw this out in chapter 5. Could I have the next slide, please, Sarah? I feel like I'm sort of suddenly on with Boris Johnson. Next slide, please. I won't start sharing stats about COVID today and how many vaccinations we've had. Okay, so in chapter 6, which is the last chapter, we really try to celebrate the value of studying sociology, and it's called Be Transformative. We recognise that sociology allows us to think differently, not just about ourselves and society, but also our place in it. And Jen and I both share some sort of personal stories about how sociology has transformed us. Can I have the next slide, please? We also argue that sociology in this regard is central to what Nussbaum calls education for democracy. By studying sociology, you don't just change your view of yourself, which can often be quite a major experience. It allows you to see the world and to recognise the injustices and the difficulties that people experience, and take a more active and conscious role in society, recognising that as individuals there is this relationship between agency and structure, between self and society, and even though our lives are shaped by the social circumstances in which we live, we can work to make the world a better place. And we talk about that capacity and how sociology, for me, really instills that in students that study it. Could I have the next click, please? And therefore, we go on to examine how the importance that sociology is applied, that it has an impact on the wider social world. It's what Giddens calls the double hermeneutic. By studying the social world, you change the social world. And what we argue in the book is that that gives us a responsibility to be not just public, but also humane. And can I have the next slide, please? Because our society, and I think I was touching on this at the beginning, we're living in unprecedented times. We live in a globe which is, there's over 7 billion of us. We've got environmental havoc. We're still enslaving people. We've got huge inequalities, rather catastrophically. The statistics tell us that 85% of us own nothing still. We're facing huge problems. And for me, and not just me, Richard Osman, yes, go for Richard, sociology is central for us to understand this and to agitate and come up with solutions. Can I have the next slide, please? And Glenn Plummer says it like this. Unfortunately, I can't read it out because I've got something which is covering the slide for me. But what he's basically, I can't see my own slides. But what I love this quotation. Hopefully you're reading it as I'm jumbling and stumbling over my words because I can't see the quotation myself. I should be able to remember it off by heart. But I love this quotation from Ken Plummer, because what he argues about sociology is that it teaches us that we create this world that we live in, but that we can challenge it. And he basically throws us down a gauntlet. He says, you know, what we have to do as sociologists is, if we can, is make the world a bit better, even if it's only in a small way, in our own short lifetimes. So sociology in this regard is humane, and we make this point in the book. Can I have the next slide, please? Hopefully I can see it. We finished the book with putting on a pair of rose-tinted glasses by recognising that while sociology is often a study of social problems and difficulties, and it's very important in that regard, sociology also teaches us how to live good lives. It identifies those real qualities of human capacity that enable us to have flourishing lives and to build a better world. We really identify the sociology that takes Plummer's view and looks at how the very good things that happen in our communities and in our wider society. And we've got a very short ending to the book, which is basically called, you know, kind of a sociology of hope, if you like. Can I have the next slide, please? So sociology is then transformative. I hope I've made, I've said that a few times. I know that you know that. But what we also do in the book is identify how sociology is not just transformative for your sense of self, but by acquiring these dispositions as a sociologist, you place yourself in a very good position for the rest of your life. Once you're a sociologist, you can't stop being one. You see the world differently, but you acquire a whole series of capacities that make you not just a democratic and active citizen, but also a really useful person in the workplace. Could I have the next click, please, Sarah? And there's a quote here, which I can see, yes, which comes from the BSA, which says, studying sociology involves continuous interplay between matters of concern in society. And for this reason, employers recognise the intellectual and analytical capacity that sociology affords. And this means that students often say, well, what am I going to do with a sociology degree? What you're going to do with a sociology degree is it will prepare you for many, many, many jobs, as well as all walks of life. And if I could have the next slide, please, Sarah. I think I list, and you have to do some clicks now. We identify in the book the careers that graduates who study sociology, where they go and what they go on to do, and the differences that they make in those different occupations. Can I have the last slide, please? So here we are at the end. I have no idea what the time is, but I really wanted to introduce the book and show really that what we're trying to do, as I said at the beginning, is to defend sociology, to celebrate sociology, and to also extend sociology so that current students, our next generation, are apprised of the work that sociologists are doing right now, and the difference that they are bringing about. Okay, so that's me done.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that fantastic presentation, which I hope everyone's enjoyed. So we're going to move now to some questions, and I can see we've got a couple already. Can you see those, Sarah, or shall I?
No, I can't actually, sorry.
That's fine. So the first question comes from Simonette, and she's saying, do you need a PhD to be a sociologist?
I think once I think once you've studied A-level sociology, you have become a sociologist. I mean, if you want to be a professional sociologist and you work in a university, you will need a PhD. But once you've studied sociology, I think the A-level is brilliant actually in this regard. It really gives a really great coverage of the discipline. And once you have the capacity to think like a sociologist, you will always be a sociologist. But if your question is about wanting to be a sociologist in a university, yes, the normal route is a PhD.
Thank you. And then we've got another question from Emma Aston. So she says, do you see this as a book for students rather than teachers of sociology? How do you see students using the book?
Yeah, it's definitely a book for students. And I see it as hopefully being having a number of different kind of roles in that regard. So I think it can start off right at the beginning before you start your A-level by just reading the book and getting a sense of sociology in all its glory. particularly chapters, I think the first 2 chapters are really about, and the last chapter really, about celebrating what sociology does. The chapter on theory is there to be a constant source for students where they can dip it, as I said in the presentation, dip in and dip out. I think sometimes when you talk about theory, particularly in the textbooks, it's not the textbook's fault, because obviously they've got to cover a lot of information, but sometimes it's very bite-sized. And so what we've tried to do in the book is give some context to the theory so you learn a little bit more. So I think it's useful, that bit would be useful, that chapter and the chapter on methods would be useful throughout the whole A-level and access courses, and actually even first year university, actually. And then chapter 4 is certainly covering some of the specification, but in a very different way to the textbook. So it's just trying to get students really excited about each of those topics and what it is we draw out as sociology, some of the key things that we're pulling out.
Thank you. And we've got another interesting question actually, so asking about whether you had any tips for speaking to parents, e.g. at an open evening, to reinforce the idea that sociology would be a great choice for their child.
Yes, well, I can send you my talk that I do at open days at universities, but yes, so parents can be quite hard taskmasters. But I mean, I think just my last point really, that sociology does give you an enormous, a really wide range of skills and capacities that take you into all types of work. And that also, I mean, one of the things that parents, I think, get anxious about is whether sociology is a facilitating subject and whether it will get you into all universities. And actually this has been, I've noticed there's some discussion on the AQA Facebook page recently, and I went and checked, and actually it is accepted by all universities and is actually really valued by universities. But for me, what I really promote about sociology is that there is no other subject that really tackles the very things that we experience as human beings and allows us to think about them in a careful, considered and creative way. And for that reason, sociology is empowering and it's transformative, as well as, you know, affording you all these skills that you can take forward, not just in work, but in the workplace. And I hope Kathy agrees, but at least I think in the book that we do that, we kind of spend a lot of time really promoting the importance of studying sociology. And I would hope that maybe you could even take some bits of the book out and put them on slides and use those at open days with parents, because as I said right at the outset, sociology for me is exceptionally important, but we really needs an advocate, and I'm hoping this book acts as a form of advocacy.
That's brilliant, thank you. And then we've got another question. So from Han Arrol saying, I want to study social research and I'm planning on going to university in Asia, but what kind of A-levels will be the most powerful in this area? I'm doing biology and core maths AS level next year on top of my A-level sociology.
If you want to go into social research, sociology is a great A-level as a basis for that, because, you know, as I said in this presentation, research methods are part of our toolkit. You learn about a whole range of different methods that you would use in social research. But more than that, and I think sociology is very peculiar in this regard, you don't just learn the skills of how to use the methods and the advantages and disadvantages of the methods. We understand why we use particular methods and what insights that they give. So sociology will be a fantastic background for that, for the development of social research. And social research would be a great, I recommend that you do that. I think it's a great career.
Fantastic. I don't think we've got any other questions for the moment, but I don't know. People are
probably thinking about the football, Kathy.
They probably are, but I don't know, Sarah, if you wanted to say anything about the work that you are doing more generally to kind of promote links between HE and teachers in schools and colleges.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is partly for a long time in my own university, I've worked with our local teachers, and I've seen the real importance and value of working between universities and schools. And so I've set up, for example, teacher networks and that kind of thing. But now I'm BSA trustee with responsibility for public engagement. And so, you know, what I'm doing is trying to work out how we can support teachers better through the professional association, but also through the universities. And there's a number of things that I've been doing to support that. One of the things, of course, is I've been doing the surveys with teachers, so you may have been involved in those, which gives us a you know, an academic knowledge base about what's actually happening and what teachers want. And it seems to me that teachers want a number of things. They want to have up-to-date sociological knowledge at their fingertips, and sometimes that's just they can't access it because it's, you know, in journals that you have to, with huge fee, you know, sort of you can't, paywall is the word I'm looking for, paywalls. But also that teachers are often feeling that they're quite isolated because they might be the only teacher in the school, so they want networks. And so we've been working very hard to think about how we can set that up. And so some of the things that are going to happen are we're going to be developing teacher resources, which will be free on the BSA website, and we'll also be a host for teacher resources. So if you want to send your resources, we'll become the repository. We're setting up conferences for teachers, and that should be an annual conference, but also hoping to set up local hubs so that teachers connect with each other. And I've really noticed this, you know, during the whole tags, teacher assessed grades, and you know, if you're a single teacher and you need someone to moderate, and constantly on Facebook pages they're saying, will someone help me? You know, we want to help facilitate that. So that's some of the things that we will be doing in the future, and I'm really hopeful that this book is part of that process and that project, that it's a neat little thing. You know, it's pocket size, but I hope that we've written it in a way that is not just about enthusing you, but it's accessible. It shows that sociology, you know, it showcases sociology, but it also makes sociology a good thing, accessible for teachers and for students.
Fantastic, thank you. And so just to let everyone know, the book is out this week, I think. So hoping you'll be able to take a closer look, and there's a link to our website there if you're interested. If no one's got any more questions, let me just check. Oh, hang on. Oh, got two more. So another one, final question from Han. What sort of qualifications do sociology university courses tend to look for, aside from sociology A-level?
Well, actually, interestingly, if you mean to study sociology at university, well, often students that take sociology also take it alongside history and psychology and English, so they're all very useful other subjects to study alongside sociology. But actually, in the previous question, we were talking about a student that was studying sociology alongside biology and maths, and I think that's also brilliant. And I think I mentioned earlier that with sociology and biology are having some really interesting synergies and connections right now, which is very exciting. So I don't think that there is any expectation that you should do another subject alongside it. It's not like psychology, which, you know, really demands maths. I mean, you do need some statistical competency to do sociology at university, but you know, we support students at university to acquire that competency. But also students arrive and do sociology at university having never studied the A-level. So, you know, sociology is one of those things, once it gets you, it gets your passion. You can do really well at it, whether just irrespective of the kind of other background that you've got. So I hope that answers that question.
And then we've got a final question from Emma Aston, just saying, would you mind if I contacted you about the BSA public engagement? I'm one of a few teachers who are setting up free CPD teach meets for sociology teachers, and would really love it if you'd be interested in being involved.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Have you shared my email, Kathy? Or
no, but I can do.
Can you share that, and then that will make it easier? Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to you, Emma.
Sorry, bear with me while
That's all right. I can't see the chat. I can't see the clock now.
We're now at 52 minutes. So
we're fine.
We're fine.
There's no cheering going on downstairs, and my stepfather was arriving to watch it, and I had to tell him, you must not ring the doorbell because I'll be doing my presentation.
Okay, so I've put Sarah's email in the chat there. So I think
yes, that's it.
Yeah, so get in touch. And yeah, so thank you so much, Sarah. It's been a fantastic session, and thank you to everyone for attending. And we'll be in touch to send you a recording if you want to share it with others in your department.
Okay,
yeah,
lovely.
thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.